In 1993, a Wall Street financier bought 7,600 acres of New Mexico desert from the governor's family for $12 million. That's a lot of money. He built a 26,000 square foot mansion, a private airstrip, and a building that his staff called the Ladies' Residence, and a barn that a retired state police officer would later tell the FBI contained a concealed incinerator. He also told scientists at Harvard and MIT that he wanted to use this compound to impregnate 20 women at a time and seed the human race with his DNA. And no, this is not a villain from Battlestar Galactica. This is Jeffrey Epstein. The FBI raided Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse in Manhattan, they raided his mansion in Palm Beach, and they raided his private island. But they have yet to really search his ranch. Of course, until very recently. The property is called Zorro Ranch, and it is more disturbing than even the island. It is about 30 miles south of Santa Fe in a stretch of high desert near the town of Stanley, which has a population of roughly 100 people, which is not that many. There was a lot of conspiracy surrounding the Zorro Ranch, it being a baby-making ranch in which Epstein used his ties to scientists to study ways to impregnate the world with his genetic seed. Also, the fact that 1 month after he was sentenced in 2008, got his sweetheart deal, the Zorro Trust won an $85 million lottery in the state of New Mexico. The Zorro Ranch, Epstein's property trust, won an $85 million lottery shortly after. I mean, is that money laundering? I have no idea. It seems like it's a fucking scam. To be fair, that is unresolved. There's a possibility that it was just some random person who named their thing Zorro Trust or whatever. That's like a conspiracy as well. But needless to say, there's a ton of conspiracy surrounding the Zorro Ranch that needs to be investigated. Jeffrey Epstein bought it back in 1993 from the family of Bruce King, who was the sitting governor of New Mexico at the time. When a reporter asked King why Epstein wanted the land, he said, "I guess he just likes New Mexico. Like a lot of people. Thank you, Mr. King. Hopefully you never went there." After purchasing it over the next decade, Epstein turned the ranch into a compound. The main residence was 26,000 square feet, 3 stories, 4 bedrooms, an indoor pool, a gym, a library, and a basement with an exercise room, a massage room, and a jacuzzi. Around it, he built what NBC News described as a miniature town that housed his servants and groundskeepers with a 7-bay heated garage, a firehouse, a ranch office, and the original adobe residence that came with the land. There was also a 3-bedroom lodge for guests, an off-grid log cabin, a vintage rail caboose on tracks, a yurt, and a set of buildings made to look like a Western film set. Even had ancient Native American petroglyphs moved onto the property for decoration. And then there was the Ladies' Residence, a separate building designed by the architecture firm Wimberly, Allison, Tong, and Gu, specifically designated as a housing for young women. And we know this because court filings corroborate that this is where they were kept separate from the main house. The Gu firm resigned from the project in 2018 after employees raised concerns about Epstein's background, and by that point, the building was basically completed, and only a year later, Jeffrey went, "Ah!" As soon as the cameras turned off for routine conspiracy maintenance, he hurt himself. Ghislaine Maxwell had her own 4,600 square foot residence on the Zorro compound, according to county records as well. The ranch had a 4,400 foot grass airstrip with an aircraft hangar and a helipad, and over 10 years, flight logs show 105 documented flights moving people in and out using Epstein's Boeing 727, a Gulfstream 4, and various helichoppers. And the routes that they traveled form a triangle between Teterboro in New Jersey, Van Nuys in California, and Albuquerque, all designed to avoid major commercial airports. And something that's notable about these logs is what analysts call passenger laddering, which means the people who flew in were often not the same people who flew out, and passengers were repeatedly listed as just female 1 or male 1 with no real names attached, which obviously results in a level of anonymity built into flight logs. Ghislaine Maxwell appeared on 37% of all flights to New Mexico and was present on nearly every trip through 2001. Her assistant, Emmy Taylor, made 33 documented flights to the ranch, sometimes traveling without Maxwell, and Epstein's longtime pilot, Larry Vysotsky, testified in federal court that Epstein visited the ranch about 5 or 6 times a year. In 1996, a 16-year-old girl from Arizona named Annie Farmer was flown to Zorro Ranch under the pretense of planning a volunteer trip to Thailand. When she arrived, She found herself alone at the massive compound with Epstein and Maxwell. They took her shopping for cowboy boots, then to a local movie theater where Epstein immediately began holding her hand and rubbing her foot and arm with no effort to hide the behavior from Maxwell, his supposed partner at the time. That night, Maxwell insisted on giving Farmer a massage, told her to take off her clothes, pulled down the sheet, and began the assault. The next morning, Epstein crawled into her bed and more happened to her, unfortunately. By the way, the entire time she was 16 years old. She reported what happened to the FBI in 2006, and the information, as you probably could guess, went nowhere. Her complaint sat in the system for 20 years, and she wasn't the only one. 14-year-old girl known in court records as Jane testified at the Maxwell trial that she was flown to New Mexico with Epstein and Maxwell, and she described the ranch as this giant ranch sort of in the middle of nowhere, and it seemed very empty on the interior, meaning there wasn't really any other people around. She was also sexually abused and forced into orgies. In 2004, a 15-year-old girl was invited on what she was told was a trip to a Las Vegas magic show with her sister, and instead they flew to Zorro Ranch where sexual abuse began and continued for hours. This girl later recalled during the assault looking up and seeing framed photographs of Epstein posing with famous and powerful people, and she said, "What I remember most vividly was him explaining to me how beneficial the experience was for me and how much he was helping me to grow," which is fucking disturbing and horrifying. After the assault, there was an ATV crash on the property, and another girl said, "No one gets in trouble for anything here." A college student named Joanna Schoberg was pressured into repeated sexual massages at the ranch as well. Epstein told her directly, "I want you to be the mother of my baby." And that's going to be a recurring theme throughout this entire video, is this insane obsession with lineage and genetics. And this is one of the darkest things to come out of all the Epstein stuff, and probably the least talked about. It's certainly the least investigated. Also, a young aspiring ballet dancer who needed rent money for her mother was coerced into sex with Epstein and unnamed associates at the ranch over multiple visits between 2007 and 2010. According to her lawsuit, Epstein told her that opportunities were endless, as long, of course, if she complied with what he dictated, and if she did not, he could take it all away. At least 10 women and girls have alleged grooming or abuse at Zorro Ranch starting in the mid-1990s, and half of them were fucking teenagers. The ranch manager, a man named Bryce Gordon, was interviewed by the FBI in February of 2007, and he described a regular flow of young women arriving at the airstrip and said most were hired locally through a Santa Fe spa called 10,000 Waves, or through referrals, though the spa later denied ever providing or referring masseuses to the ranch. Of course they did. The FBI interview was terminated after someone instructed the staff not to cooperate with agents. Virginia Giuffre, who was trafficked by Epstein across multiple properties starting around 2000, compared the ranch grounds to Disneyland. Her posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl, which was published in October of 2025 after she died by suicide in April of that same year at 41 years of age, she described the manicured grounds of Zorro Ranch, gurgling fountains, a tennis court, grass airstrip, in the hangar. Zorro Ranch specifically seemed to attract Epstein's science friends. The other places had princes and other rich and powerful famous celebrities and people, you know the list of them. Some of the most respected scientists in the world were flying into this ranch under very strange pretenses, and they were being paid millions of dollars. In 2003, Jeffrey Epstein made the single largest donation in the history of Harvard's mathematics department, which was $6.5 million, to a professor named Martin Nowak. This was to establish the program for evolutionary dynamics. After Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting a minor in Florida in 2008 and registered as a sex offender, most people assumed his ties to academia were over, because academia often involves young people who can be taken advantage of. So you think that they would, kind of excommunicate him. But no! Between 2010 and 2018, Epstein visited Nowak's program at Harvard more than 40 times. He had his own office in the building at One Brattle Square with an access card to the headquarters and a flattering page about himself on the program's website. After the sweetheart deal, by the way. Staff referred to the office as Jeffrey's office, and according to Harvard's own internal report, they said Epstein was routinely accompanied on these visits by young women described as being in their 20s who acted as his assistants. But back to the Professor Nowak. His name appears more than 8,000 times in the 3.5 million pages of DOJ files that were released in early 2026. I don't even know what the full number is at this point, but I know there's still some, they deleted some, and more stuff's been corroborated, and it's getting pretty fucking bad out there. So bad, we're now at war. All right, guys, it's so bad we went to war. As of February 2026, believe it or not, Nowak has been placed on administrative leave for the second time. So that's Harvard. At MIT, the money moved differently. Joy Ito, the director of the MIT Media Lab, accepted $525,000 from Jeffrey Epstein for the lab and another $1.2 million in personal investments, which is a gigantic, colossal red flag. Investigate that man. That was just the direct funding, by the way. Epstein also directed approximately $7.5 million in donations from other wealthy individuals, including Bill Gates and financier Leon Black, to the Media Lab through a system specifically designed to hide his involvement because he was a criminal. 3 MIT vice presidents, Gregory Morgan, Jeffrey Newton, and Israel Ruiz, all knew that Epstein was a convicted sex offender when they approved their arrangement in 2013. They decided to accept the money anyway, but of course, keep it anonymous and relatively small so Epstein couldn't use it to rehabilitate his reputation, because they wouldn't want to let Epstein rehabilitate his reputation using their reputations. Ito and his development director, Peter Cohen, made sure Epstein's name never appeared in the records, and Cohen told staff that Epstein's name couldn't be involved in logging a $2 million gift from Bill Gates because they needed to hide that it had been done at Epstein's direction. So they're covering it up. They're covering up their involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. I wonder why. Staff at the Media Lab referred to Epstein as Voldemort, or he who must not be named, to avoid putting his name in official documents. That is insane. In September of 2019, Ronan Farrow published a piece in The New Yorker exposing the entire arrangement sourced from a former development associate named Xenia Swenson, who'd gone to whistleblower aid, and Ito, this guy, resigned the next day. But of course, the money does not stop at Harvard and MIT. Let's take Lawrence Krauss, guest on the Joe Rogan Experience quite a few times, a theoretical physicist at Arizona State University. This man received $250,000 from Jeffrey Epstein and maintained an almost 15-year friendship with him. He was even friends with him after the 2008 conviction. After the conviction, Krauss gave an interview to the Daily Beast because, of course, it was a bad look, and he said, "Jeffrey has surrounded himself with beautiful women and young women, but they're not as young as the ones that were claimed. As a scientist, I always judge things on empirical evidence, and he always has women's ages 19 to 23 around him, but I've never seen anything else. So as a scientist, my presumption is that whatever the problems were, I would believe him over other people." Bro, how about as a scientist, you go fuck yourself, all right? How about as a fucking scientist, you suck it? How about that, you When Krauss later faced his own sexual misconduct allegations, documents show he turned to Epstein for advice on handling the social media, or just the media in general, which is hilarious, genuinely. I wonder what his reaction was as a scientist. Seth Lloyd, an MIT professor of quantum computing, took $225,000 for research and $60,000 personally, deposited it into his own bank account without reporting that to MIT, which that seems like a crime, by the way. I don't think it is, but like, if China were to do it, it'd be an absolute big time crime, and you'd be treason, brother. Come on, treason. I like China more than Jeffrey Epstein. I'm gonna be real with you, but it's peas and carrots. You know, they're nothing. They're nothing. As a scientist, I kind of know these things. Seth visited Epstein in prison at the Palm Beach County Jail during his 2008 sentence and acknowledged Epstein's funding in 19 published academic papers, which is crazy. Leon Botstein, the president of Bard College, which is apparently a real fucking place, received $150,000 personally from Epstein through a foundation called Gratitude America in 2016. He later called Epstein a truly evil man, which is so funny. Give me some money, Epstein, for my science. Thank you, Epstein. I'm such a scientist, I drink smart water. Meanwhile, faculty at Bard and the Simon's Rock Early College, they have been calling for this dipshit's resignation. Can I legally call people dipshit on the internet? I think I'm gonna start calling people dipshit a lot more. Marvin Minsky, possible dipshit, and the MIT artificial intelligence pioneer, received $100,000 from Epstein in 2002, which was the first Epstein donation to MIT, and Also, Epstein claimed to have funded this dipshit, Minsky, for 20 years and organized 2 academic symposia on his private island, one in 2002 and the other in 2011. Virginia Giuffre testified in a 2016 deposition that Epstein directed her to have sex with Minsky. Stephen Hawking attended a 2006 conference in the U.S. Virgin Islands funded by Epstein and was photographed at a barbecue on Little St. James. Steven Pinker, the guy with the fucking crazy hair. A lot of science people have crazy hair. He flew on Epstein's private plane and analyzed a federal statute on using the internet to entice minors for Epstein's defense attorneys. Hundreds of emails between Pinker and Epstein were released a couple months ago in November 2025. It is crazy how these science people loved Jeffrey Epstein. It's almost like science and morals aren't the same thing, guys. I worship science. You know why I worship science? Because of all the empirical evidence. It makes me a good person. This fucking video is legitimately making me hate science. I'm just kidding. That's not true. I love science. Imagine though, if I was that fucking stupid and I was just like, Epstein, science? Epstein likes science and some science people are bad? Science, dude. I got pure blood. I didn't get vaccinated. Sometimes I jack off in the toilet. In total, Harvard accepted $9.1 million from Jeffrey Epstein, and MIT accepted $850,000 directly, with another $7.5 million directed through other donations. So, really setting the stage for how bad these people are. Everybody that we're talking about who knew, who didn't know, honestly, you're a fucking idiot. If you're a science person and you didn't know, then you're not a very good science person. You're in fact a dipshit. Every scientist on that list knew who Jeffrey Epstein was and what he'd done. Some of them literally tried to defend him. And if they didn't, they absolutely could just Google search, who is Jeffrey Epstein? They still took the money anyway, because money talks, wealth whispers. All right, money talks and wealth whispers. So what was the money being used for? Well, he wasn't really buying prestige, although it did seem like he really enjoyed the idea of prestige. He wasn't paying for buildings with his name on them like some rich people do, or endowing chairs to impress people at dinner parties. You know, look at all these scientists I've got over here. They're my money slaves. I give them money and they do what I want because they're science people. And it turns out science people are easily bought and paid for. Anyways, who the f was that? The common denominator for these science people, a little bit of a science word there for you guys, is that the ones Jeffrey Epstein funded had something in common. It had nothing to do with physics or computer science or artificial intelligence. They all worked in and around genetics, evolutionary biology, or transhumanism. And that is where the Zorro Ranch conspiracy comes into play. On July 31st, 2019, the New York Times published a story by reporter James B. Stewart based on interviews with 4 people who had direct conversations with Jeffrey Epstein about his plans for Zorro Ranch. According to those sources, Epstein wanted to use the ranch to impregnate as many as 20 women at a time with his own DNA, and described the goal as seeding the human race, improving humanity through selective breeding, with himself as the sole genetic donor. Which, by the way, I don't know if you've seen him or listened to him talk, but his voice and his physiognomy, I don't exactly consider that alpha or good in any way. And with smarts, you just learn stuff, you know? You just learn. So I don't really understand that, other than Jeffrey being a completely deluded psychotic maniac. Epstein's plan was modeled on something called the Repository for Germinal Choice, a sperm bank that operated in Escondido, California from 1980 to 1999. It was founded by a businessman named Robert Clark Graham, whose original goal was to collect sperm exclusively from Nobel Prize winners and breed what he considered genetically superior children. The media called it the Nobel Prize Sperm Bank. In practice, only one Nobel laureate actually donated, a physicist named William Shockley, who was also a notorious racist and eugenicist. So obviously, it's kind of like a racist eugenicist thing, you know, to like fix genes of people or whatever. Seems pretty insane. The bank claimed 215 children before it closed. Over 19 years, that's not that many people. I mean, that's crazy. Now, obviously, Epstein's version is critically different from the version that Graham created. Graham wanted a plethora of elite donors. Epstein just wanted to be Genghis Khan. Either way, the context of this reframes what we already know about the ranch. The building called the Ladies' Residence wasn't just for housing young women, it was essentially an infrastructure for a breeding program in the middle of Arizona. The private airstrip was not there for convenience, it's isolatory. It starts to sort of make sense why this place hasn't been searched yet, probably because there's the most fucking evidence there. Of course, there's no confirmed evidence the breeding program was carried out, but the infrastructure is essentially there. The scientists were being funded, and Epstein was telling people what he intended to do. I mean, he told Joanna Schoberg that he wanted to impregnate her. One of the scientists who heard Epstein discuss his plan was George Church, a Harvard geneticist and one of the pioneers of the CRISPR gene editing technology. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of CRISPR. It's gene editing. It's kind of interesting. It's pretty fucking crazy. Church met Epstein around 2006 and continued meeting him several times a year, even after the 2008 conviction, like every other science guy. And when the Baby Ranch story broke in July 2019, Church told Stat News, "I never heard anything about it. I'd have thought that I would have been involved in that kind of conversation, but it didn't tend to go in that direction. But also, I think people tend to behave themselves around me." Dude is a fucking black hole of charisma. He also said, "There should have been more conversations about, should we be doing this? Should we be helping this guy? There was just a lot of nerd tunnel vision." Seems kind of honest, I'm gonna be real with you guys, but still a dipshit for sure. In December of 2019, Church went on 60 Minutes and told Scott Pelley, "You don't always know your donors as well as you would like." And he argued that so-called tainted money can be used for good, like the tobacco money was used for good things. Yes, science man, I love the way you look at that. As a great man once said, a broken clock is still right twice a day. And that is an important fact to contend with. But also, we can say F you, if we want as well. Freedom of speech. Then, fast forward, February 2026, the DOJ releases some heavily redacted Epstein documents. New details came out that made the nerd tunnel vision defense way harder to maintain. Church's own online calendar, which was later removed from the internet after NBC News made inquiries, showed 6 documented interactions with Epstein in 2014 alone, including a lunch at Noakes Institute, a dinner with Joy Ito and Reid Hoffman, phone calls, and a teleconference with an anti-aging researcher named James Clement. In July 2014, Church wrote Epstein an email that said, "Many thanks for your very encouraging words yesterday morning." And this was in the context of outlining a $10 million investment proposal involving companies Church had co-founded, including Geneticist, which develops gene-edited organs for human transplant. That sounds fucking crazy. In December of 2018, just weeks after the Miami Herald published its investigation into Epstein's crimes, newly released emails showed Church and Epstein had a lunch planned. So it really doesn't look that, it's just nerd tunnel vision. Oh my God. Thank you for the money, Mr. Epstein. Thank you. Dude, how about I rip you limb from limb? How about that? I'm a little guy, all right? How about I rip you limb from limb? So I can. I've got ape strength. I have literal monkey strength. My family comes from Sicily, all right? I'm Sicilian. Okay, that is as close to cave dwellers as it gets. My great-grandfather was named Augustus, and he was 4'9". That's why whenever I look like this, you can see where punches are meant to deflect off my forehead. You see the angles I'm working with here, guys? Anyways, back to the story. When confronted with the tissue sample revelations in 2026, Church said, "Multiple people were telling me various things that were mildly contradictory, and I made the wrong call. And I felt he had served his time, and that was a bad judgment." You thought he served his time? This guy is a fucking dipshit. You thought he served his time? I thought he served his time. I'm a science guy. All the empirical evidence shows he served his time. Dude, Epstein's interest in genetics was not limited to funding researchers. He also wanted to live forever. He told associates he wanted his head and his penis cryogenically frozen after death, believing he could be resurrected in the future to continue spreading his DNA. He was also deeply invested in artificial intelligence and believed his consciousness could be eventually uploaded or preserved digitally. To that end, he donated $20,000 to the Worldwide Transhumanist Association in 2011, followed by $300,000 in 2014 and $150,000 in 2016. He also gave between $100,000 and $120,000 to an AI scientist named Ben Goertzel. That is a cool name. Goertzel, dude. This fella chaired the organization. The organization was chaired by a guy named Goertzel. What in the fuck? Goertzel acknowledged the support in his 2014 book, writing, "Jeffrey Epstein, whose visionary funding of my AGI research has helped me through a number of tight spots over the years." The book was called Science, It's all about empirical evidence. And yes, I think Jeffrey Epstein served his time. Now let's take this email. In July of 2018, a Bitcoin developer named Brian Bishop contacted Epstein about investing in a designer baby project, pitching a venture aimed at, according to the emails, producing the first live birth of a human designer baby and possibly a human clone within 5 years. That was 2018. Bishop said the group was proceeding with mouse testing at a Ukrainian lab. And Epstein replied, "I like implant embryo. Wait 9 months. Great ending." What the f does that mean? There is some hilarity here for Epstein. He spent all his life and all this time planning these things. Millions spent on longevity research, cryonics planning. He looked like a chud, okay? He's hideous, very poorly taken care of, and not to mention he died in a Manhattan jail cell in August 2019. He was killed, most likely by our government, or he conveniently turned the cameras off and, used his magic powers to swing from the rafters. I really don't know what happened, but I don't believe that he did end his own life. I don't think he killed himself at all. I think that's a 0% chance. I think under the Trump administration, now this one, the third one, or the second one, third try, I guess, it seems pretty clear now that there is a very deep implication across the board. And the dude is either dead and killed by our government in 2019, or he's alive and in Israel. I wouldn't be surprised either way. Genuinely. I would be more surprised to walk out of my room right now, go in the kitchen, and find a new hero from Jimmy John's. Sponsored today's episode. I'm just kidding. There is one in the kitchen waiting for me, but it's not sponsored. I just thought that might be somewhat funny to say. Anyways, guys. Among the freezers inside George Church's lab at Harvard Medical School, there's one devoted to housing tubes of human blood and spit destined to have their DNA read and posted to the open internet as a part of something called the Personal Genome Project. Samples can sit in that freezer for years, waiting for funding to be sequenced. And in the summer of 2013, the project's director of research, a young scientist named Mad Ball, which sounds like some kind of god from the Elder Scrolls, he was unnerved to learn that another member of the team was pushing to prioritize one sample that had been in the fridge only a few weeks, jumping ahead of samples that had waited for years. Ball went into the participants' records, punched in the sample's ID number, and Googled the name that came up. It was Jeffrey Epstein's name. Ball later told Stat News, "It was such a shock to me. I didn't even have words. It looked like a quid pro quo sort of thing, which would have been upsetting, but not super upsetting if it wasn't a bad person, but just a rich person. But this was a rich, bad person, and it looked awful." Ball packed up their belongings and left the lab immediately. Oh my God, someone with morals. That's crazy. And didn't even know about Jeffrey Epstein, had to Google him. He's like, "Oh, this guy's a piece of shit. I'm quitting. There's some quid pro quo stuff going on in here. Evil science being done. What the What in the Where's Dr. Evil? He's literally in this room with me right now. Dr. Evil is. I feel like Dr. Evil wouldn't even do that. And he's got evil in his name. It also appears that the remaining staff of that program prevented Epstein's sample from receiving special treatment, but the lines had already been created there. The sample itself came from a visit documented in DOJ files under the itinerary with the header, "Go to Harvard!" on June 28, 2013. Epstein had a skin cell biopsy taken through Church's Personal Genome Project, and from that biopsy, researchers generated fibroblast cell lines and stored them in liquid nitrogen. That specific generation for researchers is very important to understand why it matters. Fibroblast cells are connective tissue cells taken from a skin sample, and on their own, they're relatively inert, but if you reprogram them into what are called induced pluripotent stem cells, or lowercase iPS cells, they become functionally identical to embryonic stem cells. An embryonic stem cell, if you didn't know, can become any type of cell in the human body. And if you split those stem cells with CRISPR, a tool that lets you cut and rewrite specific sequences of DNA, you have a complete genetic toolkit for one individual cells that can theoretically grow into anything engineered to any specification. And what those cells were intended for became clear in February of 2014 when a doctor at Massachusetts General Hospital named Joseph Bakuria, who had been introduced to Epstein by Church, sent Epstein a research proposal for $193,400. The proposal included exome sequencing for $1,000, fibroblast sequencing for another $1,000, full genome sequencing for $11,400 and the creation of iPS cell lines from Epstein's fibroblast cells for $10,000. So they're going to create some genetic material for Jeffrey Epstein here. The proposal specifically noted that if they did this, Epstein, like George Church, would be one of the very few people in the world to have it done. It also proposed using CRISPR gene editing to introduce mutations into Epstein's stem cells, believed to potentially increase his longevity, which would have made Epstein one of the first people in the world to have personally edited stem cells. Now, if this is 2014, 2015, this shit's happening everywhere, dude. This is like a thing that's happening, and we're all just kind of finding. It's a big. What's George Carlin say? It's a big club, we're not in it. But he says like, it's a big club, and we're not in it. Or he screams it like that. It really is. It's such a cliche to say, but when you learn things and you read and you research and you take note of patterns and you give in to your innate human nature to recognize those patterns as they happen to you, as things happen to you, all of it just trickles down to a new cliche. It's a basis of a new cliche. And I know that's a contradiction, right? A new cliche, but everything really has already happened. You already have heard all this stuff, and it's just like, oh, that's true? Wow. I thought schizophrenic people were crazy. Nah, dude. The schizos have been on the right side of history, it seems. Name one thing they got wrong. I'm just kidding. There's a lot. I'm just kidding. But there is a lot also that's like surprisingly real. Surprisingly real. Or at least most likely real. There is some empirical evidence to support it. The single largest line item on that invoice, by the way, I got a little bit sidetracked, was $160,000, and it was for something that DeCuria described as a genomic study he was dubbing the Venus Project. The goal was to study the genetics of facial features across 200 participants. The name Venus, the Roman goddess of beauty, was Epstein's idea. Epstein, by the way, very beautiful man. Just kidding. Literally one of the ugliest freaks I've ever seen in my life. In context of what we now know about his documented obsession with ranking people by physical traits, curating lists organized by genetic fitness, and editing out individuals who didn't meet his criteria for blue eyes, a $160,000 study on the genetics of facial attractiveness means more now, given all the context. The Curia says the plans never materialized. Epstein sent a $2,000 check the same day as the invoice, but beyond that, nothing. And Thucuria has not been publicly linked to Epstein before 2026 and is not accused of any wrongdoing. He told CNN that the Venus Project was an idea of Mr. Epstein's that was very preliminary and never went anywhere. And that's perfectly reasonable. You know, it looks bad because it's tied into all this other gene shit, but also if Epstein, you know, ordered something from Jimmy John's, the manager at Jimmy John's is not implicated. You know, if someone's providing a service that's not illegal, obviously, I don't have to explain that to you guys. You guys are kind of smart. Let's be real. I mean, you're watching my videos. So, like, these are smart people videos. Press like, smart people. Getting smarter every day. Just kidding. I've been getting a little dumber lately. I haven't really been spending a lot of time reading new stuff. I've been spending time out in the outside, looking off in the distance real far. As of March 2026, nobody knows where Epstein's tissue samples are. There are remnants out there of the convicted child offender sitting in a deep freezer, maybe at Harvard, maybe at one of its affiliated Boston hospitals. Nobody's addressed it properly. All right, guys. And that was a point brought up by Stat News, by the way, this year. Also brought up by Stat News, in March 2026, Stat reported that somebody appears to have recently altered the Personal Genome Project's public profile page, believed to belong to Epstein, to indicate he provided consent on January 31st, 2026, one day after the DOJ released its final batch of Epstein files and more than 6 years after Epstein died. Is it another Fortnite conspiracy? Is Jeffrey Epstein cranking 90s in Israel? Probably not, but the profiles seem to have been altered. Who altered it? I don't know. Why'd they alter it? I don't know. It's probably the DOJ hiding shit. Because we have a Department of Justice. We have multiple bureaus for investigation of these types of things, and they don't really seem to be doing anything at all. They are actually seemingly at odds with the people who are paying them. The taxpayers, they're seemingly at odds with those people. It's really weird. It's really bizarre that there's people who are like okay with this level of brain rot that's going out there. I'm talking, I've seen people who I used to respect who are now legitimately idiotic. Like, politics aside, there are people right now who are dragging themselves through a level of ooze that is so consequential they have no idea. They are on the wrong side of history, and it is objectively clear. The wrong side of history. It's fucking crazy, dude. And I'm an idiot. I don't know anything, and I can see it. So yeah, the DOJ, most importantly. But also, they did release some files, which is good. In the DOJ files released in January of this year, there's a spreadsheet titled 92nd Street Y Potential List. There are 3 versions of it that exist in the documents, each with a different document ID, and what they show is a list of approximately 70 people, organized by professional field and annotated for what Epstein called genetic fitness. Categories include genetics pioneer, medical pioneer, neuroscientist, physicist, mathematician, innovation tech, psychologist, young pioneer, and theologian. Next to many of the names is an eye color annotation, and across the 3 revisions, the proportion of people listed as having blue eyes rises as darker-eyed individuals are edited out. Version 1 had 70 people, 41 of whom were marked with blue eyes. Version 2 cut the list to 63 and pushed the blue eye count to 49. Version 3 went back up to 70 but excluded Asians and Indians from the eye color count entirely. Named individuals on the list include George Church, listed as a genetics pioneer with blue eyes, Elon Musk, innovation tech, Peter Thiel, innovation, Jim Watson, genetics pioneer, Bill Gates, Daniel Kahneman, Marvin Minsky, dipshit, and Larry Summers. All these people, let's just call them all dipshits. I mean, they're all dipshits. They're smart. Some of them are really smart. Like, objectively, they're very smart people and they're very, like, good at life, but they're also dipshits and they can all go themselves and they're all pieces of shit, to be honest. The list was the invitee roster for an event titled Homo Sapiens 2.0 at the 92nd Street Y in New York City on November 24th, 2014. And that is a bizarre name for an event, I'm gonna be honest with you, but it is pretty self-explanatory. Homo sapiens 2.0 means the next version of the human species, and the man organizing it was a convicted sex offender who had told scientists he planned to seed the human race with his DNA and had a top-secret ranch in New Mexico where he planned to do that. Church was there to speak about genetics. Epstein was there to select the participants based on eye color. 2 months after the event in January 2015, a focused email chain about the science and evolutionary theory of blue eyes circulated between Epstein, Martin Nowak, and a Harvard behavioral economist named Moshe Hoffman, who provided Epstein with evolutionary explanations about blue eye pigmentation, discussing night vision advantages and phenotype selection theory. What does green eyes mean? Just fucking normal? Good. Who gives a f? I didn't choose it. It's a very Nazi-coded thing. These people are basically just really rich Nazis, but like not National Socialists, but like the bad parts of all that, you know, the eugenics part. But then they just like they're doing it on the, it's kind of ironic. In February 2016, Epstein emailed Noam Chomsky, which is a real name of a real person, a link to an article titled Race and IQ, Genes that Predict Racial Intelligence Differences. And it was from a website called The Right Stuff. The Right Stuff, if you couldn't tell, very right-wing newsletter. Noam Chomsky, renowned leftist, so it's kind of ironic. Same with Epstein. In the email, Epstein referenced James Watson, the co-discoverer of DNA's double helix structure, who was stripped of his honors in 2019 for repeated claims that black people are genetically less intelligent. Epstein wrote that Watson was punished for accepting some uncomfortable facts. He then stated the test score gap amongst African Americans is well documented with 20 years of testing in many countries. He argued that a set of genes used for working memory could be found and adjusted, and wrote, "Not looking seems cruel," and that is referring to an editable gene that he believed could improve racial intelligence. Chomsky, renowned leftist, pushed back. In one reply, he referenced changing the genes for dedicated savagery, and Epstein's response was genetic altruism. Separately, a bank transfer recorded dated March 28, 2018 shows $270,000 dispersed to the Gnome from an Epstein-linked account. Chomsky had said the money was his own and that Epstein's accounts were used as a technicality to disperse funds from his first wife's estate after her death, which is convoluted. And honestly, it's an Occam's razor moment in my opinion. But what do I know? I'm just an idiot. I gotta stop saying that. I know some things. And I also have a GTX 5090. It's not in a computer, it's right there, but it's like, I have that and I should be more proud of it. In July 2016, a German cognitive scientist named Joscha Bach, who received approximately $300,000 from Epstein while working at MIT, wrote to Epstein, "If I'm understanding correctly,
You are suggesting you might be able to make blacks smarter by changing the time for motor layer development.
Bach asserted that black children outperform white children in motor development but lag behind in cognitive development, and proposed an evolutionary framework claiming African populations evolved for a hunting and running style of life, while Europeans developed capacities for delayed gratification for agriculture. In the same email chain, Bach called fascism
probably the most efficient and rationally stringent way of governance. Too many people, so many mass executions of the elderly and infirm makes sense. If the brain discards unused neurons, why should society keep their equivalent?
If the body poops after you eat, we should equate human value to poop. That's what he's saying, basically. That guy is an actual Nazi, like a literal Nazi, not like what people call Nazis now, which is like been lost a lot of meaning and stuff. That guy right there, that's Nazi. That's a Nazi. These people are Nazis. Epstein was a Nazi.
There's poop everywhere.
I mean, for real though, demons, bud. Demons. That is demonic. I've called it satanic before, and people who are Satanists, they're like, well, we have morals as well. We have morals. Yeah, of course. How about I say demonic and evil? How about I say evil? This is evil. You people are fucking evil. When the Boston Globe confronted Bach with these emails in November 2025, he walked them back saying,
race is itself not casual and cognitive differences, of course. And later research brought me to my current view that race is not causal for differences in development, and race is not a determinant of IQ in children or adults.
What about the fascism stuff, though, and killing the infirm and elderly? In another email, Epstein was forwarded a study linking prenatal stress to IQ outcomes, and his response was 5 words: this relates to the blacks. Beyond the emails, released documents show a $25,000 donation from Epstein's foundation to a former Duke University neuroscience postdoc named Jean-Francois Guérepi, who became a YouTuber and said, Jeffrey had defects like we all do, but he was a good man. More people like him could improve the world. The files also contain more than 1,974 email exchanges with Steve Bannon discussing strategies for building far-right movements in Europe. Now, this all seems pretty crazy, and a lot of people believe that there's like a deep moral good embedded within the science community, which I believe that. I believe that people who want their worldviews to be informed on empirical evidence, I think that's a really good, healthy way to look at stuff. But like, there's like a disturbing amount of evil in this. It's like celebrities, royalty, rich people, and science people are like really implicated in all this Epstein stuff, and there's like a new way to look at this. Is it like a broader moral question and something we should keep an eye on, or is it some kind of machine that Epstein was a master at? I'm leaning more towards the latter, I would say. I think Epstein was very evil, and I think one of the answers we can look at starts with a family that most people don't know about, and that is Ghislaine Maxwell's family. Before Ghislaine Maxwell was a convicted sex trafficker getting her very own version of Jeffrey Epstein's sweetheart deal right now in Texas, just down the street. I know where she's at. She was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a British media baron who built one of the largest publishing empires in the world. By the way, I don't know where she's at. That was just meant to sound ominous. I don't know. Robert Maxwell was born Jan Ludwig Hyman Benjamin Hack in what is now known as Ukraine. During World War II, he served in British intelligence, where his job was interrogating captured German scientists and POWs. After the war, he parlayed those contacts into the world of academic publishing, became the British distributor for Springer Verlag, and then buying a controlling stake in a company called Butterworth Springer, which he renamed Pergamon Press. Pergamon became one of the most important scientific publishers on Earth, controlling access to thousands of academic journals across physics, biology, chemistry, and mathematics. All of it. If you were a researcher in the Cold War era, there was a good chance your work was published through Pergamon. And with all of this, you can surmise that Robert controlled a level of the infrastructure through which science reached the world in that time. In 1990, the Santa Fe Institute, a prestigious research center in New Mexico co-founded by Nobel laureate Murray Gell-Mann, received a $100,000 donation from Robert Maxwell, and 2 months later, Ghislaine's sister Christine Maxwell joined the Institute's board of trustees. After Robert Maxwell died in 1991, falling off his yacht in the Canary Islands under circumstances that remain disputed, aka he was killed by Israel, Ghislaine moved to New York, and within a few years, she was in a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. She brought her father's academic network with her. In a DOJ interview conducted in July 2025, Maxwell told investigators that the connections she had made through her father's Pergamon Press network led to her introducing Epstein to the Santa Fe Institute and its scientists, including Murray Gell-Mann himself, the man who won the Nobel Prize for discovering quarks. I don't know how to say it. Quarks? I've always said quark, but I've only read it. I've never actually heard anybody really say it. Maybe I have in videos and stuff, but I've only read it. I don't know, dude. I don't say a lot of things right because I've only read stuff. I don't listen to people. I can't listen to them. People start talking, I just fucking zone out, dude. I get shark eyes. I'm like... She also told investigators that Epstein would have dinners at the house and that I was tasked to organize, and the scientists were a very major component of that. Maxwell was recruiting an intellectual eugenics infrastructure program, and she seemed to potentially be doing so using the network that her father had spent decades building that ran back to post-World War II. And then Epstein, of course, had access to that network. In March 2006, Lawrence Krauss, friend of the show, he organized a conference called Confronting Gravity at the Ritz-Carlton in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, financed entirely by Epstein. The format was 5 days of presentations and dinner, capped with an optional trip to Epstein's private island, Whittle St. James. The original promotional material said participants could meet, discuss, relax on the beach, and take a trip to the nearby private island retreat of the science philanthropist Jeffrey Epstein. Among these f***ers were 22 leading physicists. Gerodotus Hooft, he won a Nobel Prize in 1999. David Gross, Frank Wilczek, Jim Peebles, Barry Barish, Kip Thorne, the fucking Avengers of Nobel laureates. This is also when and where Stephen Hawking went. I went to Epstein's Island in 2017. Beyond these, there are dozens of other conferences that Epstein funded, and we've established how much money he injected into these systems. He was a top billionaire donor, dude, and the moral weakness of these scientists post-Epstein conviction gave Epstein credibility in that world, and then that credibility gave him access, and that's what he is. He's an access agent. That's pretty much what the smartest people among us have been saying. But it gets real evil when you start talking about sex trafficking, and then you start talking about the baby ranch in New Mexico, which that's what we're about to dive into next, the cover-up. The state of New Mexico was in and of itself woven into Epstein's operation. After Epstein pleaded guilty in Florida, New Mexico notified him that he needed to register as a sex offender. A detective visited the ranch for registration. 2 days later, Epstein was removed from the registry, and the state sent a second letter saying he didn't have to register at all. Rules for thee, not for me. Guess what the reason was? It was a loophole his lawyers engineered. Epstein's Florida plea was for misconduct with someone over the age of 16. New Mexico's age of consent is 16, so the conviction didn't meet the state's threshold for mandatory registration. So you could be a sex offender in one state, but not in another one, because that's pretty awesome. Now, of course, if you know the details of the original case, the plea excluded the 14-year-old victim documented by Palm Beach police. She was left out of the deal specifically, and without her in the conviction, there's no legal basis to put him on the list in New Mexico. So the Florida plea deal itself was already one of the most controversial in legal history, negotiated by Alexander Acosta, then the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida. He gave Epstein an 18-month county jail sentence with 6-day work release. He served 13 of the 18 months instead of a potential life sentence on federal trafficking charges. Also, with an immunity clause that protected not just Epstein, but any potential co-conspirators from federal prosecution, which effectively shut down the broader investigation. By the way, Acosta, if you didn't know, if you didn't remember, later became Secretary of Labor under President Trump and resigned in 2019 when the terms of the plea deal became national news, and he looked like a fucking evil piece of shit, or as we call them, dipshits. It was designed to keep him off registries in the state where he had a 7,600-acre baby ranch. Also, beyond that, the family that sold Epstein the ranch in 1993, the Kings, maintained ties to him for decades. Gary King, the son of Governor Bruce King, served as New Mexico's Attorney General from 2007 to 2015, meaning he was the state's top law enforcement officer during the years when Epstein was actively abusing victims at the property his father's family had sold him. By the way, if we've learned anything, referring to an AG as the area's top law enforcement officer is such a meaningless thing to say. I mean, I'm the top law enforcement officer. I'm the top cover-up officer. Pretty much. I'm the top just evil guy. Pretty much in the whole area. In the whole area. I'm the top piece of shit. I'm the top piece of shit, pretty much. It seems like that's what that means nowadays. In 2006, during his AG campaign, Gary King accepted $15,000 from the Zorro Trust, Epstein's own entity. He said he returned it after the allegations became public. Of course he did, because he wouldn't want to look bad. In 2014, while running for governor, King accepted more than $35,000 through Epstein's linked shell companies, including JEG LLC, which was registered to Epstein's Virgin Islands property. The donations, in case you were wondering, were funneled through corporate entities specifically to avoid coverage, press coverage. So, Epstein's attorney warned that the donations risked additional news coverage given King's platform on crimes against children, because that would be horribly ironic. All right. Gary King was campaigning at the time on his record of prosecuting child offenders. Just not his old buddy and pal, though, of course. In September of 2014, King requested use of Epstein's jet for Washington fundraisers, and emails show he personally initiated the flight request. By the way, not to prosecute child offenders, to apparently hang out with a child offender. His running mate for lieutenant governor, Deb Haaland, was also on the jet. Haaland says she never met Epstein and didn't know he'd chartered the flight, and she is not accused of any wrongdoing, just to be clear. King's cousin, Jerry King, worked at the state land office starting around 2003 and served as the point person for Epstein's ranch regarding the state land leases. Epstein's company, Cypress Incorporated, leased 1,243 acres of state trust land adjacent to the ranch at roughly $2,000 a year, specifically for cattle grazing. That is the official reasoning, and filings claimed 40 head of cattle, but officials determined Epstein's company ran few, if any, cattle on the trust land. The real purpose was to build a privacy buffer around the compound. Another AG called that a sweetheart deal. So many sweetheart deals with this guy. What's up with that? Governor Bill Richardson met with Epstein at least 9 times after the 2008 conviction, and as late as March 2018, records show visit to the private island in 2010, to Zorro Ranch, and to Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, of course, and a dinner that included an invitation to Woody Allen, the star of the 1999 animated movie Ants. In 2019, when the relationship became public, Richardson's spokesperson said he'd visited the ranch only once during his 2002 campaign, and to the best of his recollection, had never visited the private island. As far as I can remember, I never went. You know, I remember every place I've ever been. That's like not my house or Walmart or something. You know, you remember stuff. Humans remember stuff, I think, usually, generally speaking. So I don't buy any of this. I think these people are all full of shit and they're f***ing evil. In fact, records released in 2026 show that this dipshit visited the island in November of 2010, and that his name appears in more than 800 documents in the Epstein files. Virginia Giuffre, in a May 2016 deposition, testified that Ghislaine Maxwell directed her to give Richardson a massage and that she was sent to New Mexico. Richardson's representative called the allegations completely false and said he had never met Giuffre. He was never criminally charged. Richardson died on September 1st, 2023 at his home in Massachusetts at age 75 before the Transparency Act forced the documents into public view. So, after the files came out, the University of New Mexico Hospital renamed the Bill and Barbara Richardson Pavilion to simply the Pavilion, and when reporters asked if the change was connected to Epstein, the hospital declined to answer, which means yes. That's what that means. It means yes. Silence means yes, generally speaking. I'm just kidding. I don't know anything, dude. The FBI raided Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. They searched his Palm Beach mansion, and they raided Little St. James. But why didn't they search Zorro Ranch, the fucking baby ranch, dude? What? You tell me they didn't search that place? The thousands of acres? On July 19th, 2019, days after Epstein's arrest in New York, a retired New Mexico state police officer called the FBI about a barn on the property with what he described as a garage door that appeared to be a sally port and a chimney, warning that the property could potentially have an incinerator concealed within the barn. Sally ports, if you don't know, are standard features in prisons, military bases, and high-security government facilities. They are not standard features on barns in the New Mexico desert. So obviously the combination of a sally port entrance and a concealed chimney consistent with incineration capacity on a property where girls were being trafficked is the kind of detail that would ordinarily prompt an immediate law enforcement investigation or response. No, It was just a tip, guys. Just a tip. Just a tip was filed. Just a little simple tip. On August 23rd, 2019, an FBI agent wrote an internal communication. At this time, we don't believe there are items still located in the residence that would be of value to the investigation. Uh-oh. Okay. When FBI Deputy Director David Bowditch asked agents why they hadn't searched the ranch, they said, at this time, we don't have PC for a search of the NM residence. That means probable cause. Oh, you don't? In November 2019, a separate tip arrived, an anonymous email sent to Albuquerque radio host Eddie Aragon, who hosts a show called The Rock of Talk on Kiva 1600 AM, my favorite f***ing AM channel. The sender claimed to be a former ranch staff member, and they wrote, somewhere in the hills outside the Zorro, 2 foreign girls were buried on orders of Jeffrey and Madam G. The sender claimed the girls died by strangulation during rough and claimed possession of 7 videos depicting minors and demanded 1 Bitcoin worth approximately $8,000 at the time in exchange for information. Very fast way to lose all credibility, in all honesty, but Aragon forwarded the email to the FBI, and he says he knows the sender's identity and shared it with the FBI agent, and he said he never heard from the Bureau. So those are 2 different tips, 2 separate sources. 0 follow-up from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You know, that their whole job, I think, is to investigate stuff like this. I thought, at least. I'm pretty sure. I didn't learn that in school. I was homeschooled, by the way. I didn't learn that in school. I've just heard around the block about that. Internal federal communications from December of 2019 confirmed agents had not searched the New Mexico property yet. Both tips sat in FBI files for 6 years. It took a fucking act of Congress to get them out. And on November 19th, 2025, there was an act of Congress. Thank you, Ro Khanna. Thank you, Thomas Massey. Obviously, they got a 30-day deadline. The DOJ violated that deadline and released files in 5 batches over 2 months. And then final batch came out, millions of pages. The very tips about the Zorro Ranch were public for the first time. With the files that came out, we were overloaded with emails. Talking about emails, there's one familiar last name on an email linked to the Zorro Ranch that kind of changes everything, I would say, because it just adds a whole other level to the fucking conspiracy. It really isn't a conspiracy at this point. It's just unfortunate reality, I guess. On September 8th, 2019, less than 1 month after Epstein died in a Manhattan jail cell, the assistant United States attorney at the Southern District of New York wrote an email about the New Mexico investigation. Her name was Maureen Comey. She graduated from William and Mary in 2010 and was Pi Beta Kappa, then Harvard Law 2013, and joined the Southern District in 2014, becoming an assistant U.S. attorney in 2016, and by 2019, she was one of 3 lead prosecutors on the Epstein case, alongside Alex Rossmiller and Allison Moe, all working under the Public Corruption Unit. Jeffrey Berman was the U.S. attorney who announced the charges. In her September 8th email, Comey confirmed that she had secured an agreement from New Mexico Attorney General Hector Baldera's office to halt the state's investigation. The email said, in essence, they agreed to cease any investigation into sex trafficking and share whatever they had gathered to date regarding sex trafficking activity with our office. And that seems confusing, okay? You know, as someone who would like to see an investigation take place. The stated justification was that the parallel investigations could create conflicting witness testimony that defense lawyers might exploit. Epstein he died though. There were, as far as I'm aware, there was no defense lawyers because he's dead, because he died. Anyways, Maureen's father is James Comey, who served as director of the FBI from 2013 to 2017. No formal conflict of interest challenge was ever filed regarding the family connection, and when subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee, James Comey responded under penalty of law that at no time during his service at the DOJ or the FBI did he recall any information or conversations related to Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell. The committee accepted the response and withdrew the subpoena. By September 17, 2019, New Mexico had transferred everything to the SDNY police reports, recorded witness interviews, correspondence among state agencies, and documents related to Epstein's leasing of public lands. Everything was transferred. Balderas told reporters he was unaware that federal investigators provided any information to New Mexico officials that could have led to criminal prosecutions, and he called the cooperation a one-way relationship. He told NBC News that federal prosecutors essentially gutted our ability to aggressively seek justice for victims. And then he added, we had taken statements involving child trafficking and we had obtained corroborating records that confirmed an illicit enterprise. In July of 2020, Balderas wrote to the SDNY requesting civil forfeiture of the ranch, and he received no response. 4 months after Epstein's death on December 19, 2019, the prosecution team sent a confidential 86-page memo to U.S. Attorney Berman titled Investigation into Potential Co-Conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein. It contained statements from 24 women who reported being abused as minors and 14 women who reported being abused as adults, along with an analysis of whether or not certain Epstein associates and employees may or may not be held criminally liable. The legal analysis section is almost entirely redacted, and nobody besides Ghislaine Maxwell has been charged to date. So there's no co-conspirators, but there is co-conspirators, but it's all redacted? What are you talking about? What the f is happening right now? Maureen Comey went on to successfully prosecute Maxwell, securing a conviction in December of 2021. She received consistently outstanding performance reviews over nearly a decade, and in 2024, she was named co-chief of the Public Corruption Unit. On July 16, 2025, she was fired by email at approximately 5 p.m., citing Article 2 of the Constitution. No cause was given. Firing came 1 day after supervisors asked her to lead a major public corruption case and 3 months after her latest outstanding performance review. Comey filed a federal lawsuit challenging the termination in September of 2025 and joined Patterson Belknap as a partner in white-collar defense in February 2026. The email and the sequence of the events, I would say, speak for themselves. New Mexico had an active investigation with victim statements and corroborating records. The SDNY said, "Stop, we'll handle it." They took everything. They searched absolutely nothing. They shared nothing back. The ranch sat untouched for 7 years. They also sold the ranch. And when they finally started looking, people lose their jobs, citing Article 2 of the Constitution. It is so obviously a cover-up, dude. So obviously a cover-up.
It's a Democratic hoax.
You're a Democratic hoax. You're a idiot. In February of this year, New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres ordered the State Department of Justice to reopen the criminal investigation into Zorro Ranch, citing information in the released files that, in his word, warranted further examination. On March 9th, 7 years after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest, the New Mexico Department of Justice, State Police, and Sandoval County Sheriff's Office and a fire and rescue K-9 unit conducted the first ever law enforcement search of the property. They brought cadaver dogs and ground penetrating radar, and the search was conducted with the cooperation of the current owners, the Huffines family. No remains have been found so far. By the way, I mentioned current owners. It's not Epstein's estate. The ranch was sold in August of 2023 to a Dallas real estate developer and former Texas state senator named Donald Huffines. It was sold through an LLC called San Rafael Ranch that was created 1 month before the purchase of the property. Property has been renamed Rancho de San Rafael, and Huffines says its intended purpose is a Christian retreat. His public statement says, 4 years after Mr. Epstein's death, the Huffines family purchased property listed at a public auction whose proceeds benefited his victims, that's awesome. And the New Mexico legislature has launched a bipartisan truth commission led by Representative Andrea Romero with subpoena power and a $2 million budget to hire investigators, attorneys, and staff. It is referred to as a survivor-centered inquiry. We should have a preliminary report in July of 2026 with a final report by the end of this year. As for all the Zorro scientists, Joy Ito resigned from MIT the day after the New Yorker exposed him. Lawrence Krauss was ousted from Arizona State amid his own misconduct allegations. Martin Nowak is on paid administrative leave at Harvard for the second time. Leon Botstein is under investigation at Bard with faculty calling for his resignation. Mark Tremo left UCLA and Jack Horner left Chapman over Epstein ties in March of this year. George Church is still at Harvard somehow. Steven Pinker is still at Harvard somehow. Gerald Sussman is still at MIT, and none of them have faced any formal institutional sanctions. By the way, Harvard and MIT are both defendants in a March 2026 federal lawsuit filed by multiple former Epstein victims, with the lead attorney Roberta Kaplan saying, "This lawsuit isn't simply about one man's horrific actions, it is about a systemic failure of institutions and individuals to protect the vulnerable." So in reality, we will probably never really know what exactly happened there, but hopefully we get some information in July and more by the end of this year following the new investigation into the Zorro Ranch. We know the f***er built a building on the property to house young women and had a barn that concealed an incinerator and was funding scientists at Harvard and MIT with millions of dollars to research genetics and transhumanism. And Epstein is quoted as saying he wants to seed the human race with his DNA, and he's a sex trafficker. So like, I get where people are coming from with the conspiracies, and I don't understand why this is gone so long without being taken seriously. Anyways, thanks for watching.